Hey guys, Bob Gardner here from LiberatedMan.com. Today it's a Saturday morning, and I'm going to give you something to think about that maybe it's heavy, maybe it's not, but I think it's an important topic. I was 14 years old. 14 years old when I started looking at pornography. It was long before that I was already geared toward it in some ways, but I never looked at it or anything until I was about 14 years old. 14 years old, right when AOL started, and the computer was accessible in more of a user-friendly way, the internet was, so that I could actually look on there on my own. So I found some pornographic images. I didn't know anything about computer history or anything like that. At the time, I learned quickly, because shortly after I started looking at these things, my father found some images on the computer. He decided to confront me with it. He decided that it was time to bring it up so that we could have a conversation. This was a well-intentioned event that went terribly wrong, and by no fault of his own, because this was depths that he hadn't been into. He didn't live and grow up in the age of internet porn, so it's not my father's fault or my mother's fault or my sister's fault how this went down. It was one evening, they called me down the stairs, so I lumped down the carpeted stairs into the tile entryway, chandelier above, kind of like that sickly fluorescent kind of light in that main area of the house, but there were some incandescent lights around the living room. We had a blue couch, one of those kind of almost corduroy-ish kind of couches. It had a texture to it. A blue couch, sleeper like the sofa that turns around the corner. And my mom was sitting on the very edge of it, kind of near the entryway. My dad was standing up. My two sisters were off to the left, and the coffee table was in there. And my dad brings up that he had found some questionable material inside on the computer. He brings up that he'd seen some images of some naked women and some other things. Now, almost immediately, my sisters start making fun of this. Now, granted, they're 12 and 10. Or 9, or something like that. So they're not going to react to this they react like any others would. They started teasing and making fun of it because they thought it was hilarious. Didn't really understand the full gravity of the situation either. Oh, no, they weren't 12. They were 15, 16, my older sister, and my little sister was 12 or 13. And so I'm sitting there in between the two. And again, not their fault. They reacted like any teenager would. An uncomfortable situation. In that moment, I felt so much shame, so much embarrassment, the kind of shame and embarrassment that causes your face to flush, and that pit in your stomach that makes you oh crap, I've been caught. So I'm standing there staring at this, and at that moment, I made a split-second decision. I made a decision that it was not safe to talk to my parents about this, because if I was going to talk to them about this, and this was going to happen every time, it was not a situation I wanted to be in. And so I admitted to what they had found, and I didn't tell them anything. From that point forward, I continued to engage in pornographic material. From then on in my life, I continued to engage in masturbation and those types of activities from then on. And for another 6 years, I didn't tell another soul. I told somebody while I was serving as a missionary. I told my mission president, at the time an ecclesiastical leader. And then after that, then I told another person for a while. There was different ecclesiastical leaders. The next person outside of religious atmosphere that found out was my wife, after we had been married for a couple of years. Okay? Which means that basically for 11 years, I bottled it up. And for 11 years, I suffered what happens to a mind and a soul and a body that is engaged in that type of addictive behavior. Now, some people argue it's not an addiction. I'm not here to argue that or not. For me, it was an addiction. For me, it was a compulsive behavior. For me, it was literally things would happen and I'd come to my senses later and start to remember what had happened and freak out about it. And so this happened all because on that day in 1994, my parents decided to confront me with it. So this is not their fault. They did the best that they know how. And many, many parents function the same way. We have an issue, let's confront them with it. And let me just extend to you, from my own personal experience, a different perspective. Remember that pornography is not the problem. It's not the problem for your kid. They're young, they're curious, it's natural. They want to know things, and sometimes they don't want, it's embarrassing for them to ask it, and so they want to go look on their own. Okay? So the invitation here is not to is to not shame your kid about going and looking for pornography. If you find it early on in the process, shaming them is the worst thing you could possibly do. Telling them they should be ashamed, telling them it's going to cause blindness if they're masturbating, which some of the men that I work with their parents told them it's one of those old wives' tales that have been around. Maybe it actually does. I don't know. Maybe that's some traditional wisdom that we haven't really latched onto. Telling them that's not going to help. Shaming them about it, slapping them, punishing them for it, that is not going to help. That will only drive deeper this idea inside of themselves that they messed up, that they're messed up. Ultimately, what was going on inside of my life at the time, dude, we moved around a ton. I didn't have any close friends. I always felt unwanted. I always felt broken. I always felt unlovable. I felt alone. Loneliness had followed me my entire life. And to overcome that, curiosity was one way that made me come alive. I started looking at these and I started having these experiences that are wholly intense, powerful. It's no wonder that I'd go back to them. They're crazy. I don't understand them. They just oh, wow, what was that? Let me do that again. Just like anybody who eats something that's yummy and they're like, whoa, let me have some more of that. Same deal. The problem that I was dealing with was this deep-seated, feeling of not being wanted, of not being worthy of anything. That's the issue that needed to be addressed, not the pornography. Pornography goes away as a solution as soon as there's no problem. So if your kid comes to you, or if you find out, you get an email from some parental control thing or from some internet filter, and you discover that your child is engaged in pornography, remember this. Pornography is not their problem. You need to dig to find out what's going on in their life. Did you miss something at school? Have they been being bullied? Have their friends done something to them? Are they going through changes that they don't understand? Have they felt distance from you or felt like you don't love them? What's going on in their life? Because that's really the issue. That they went and tried something out to find a solution for. And if you can understand that and create a situation that is not confrontation, don't confront them with it. Sit by them. Let them stare off into space and just say their piece without having to say it to your face because it's already shameful enough. Let them pause in the middle of their story. Let them go on at their little stuttering pace. So that way, it's a safe place, and they understand that you're not there to confront them. You're not there to push them down. You're not there to injure them in any way, shape, or form. You're there because you see that they're suffering, and there's a visible sign that they're suffering, and you want to be there for them in that suffering so that they can have help finding a way out. That's the only reason that you're there. And as a parent, if you can offer them that, boy, the dangers of them returning to pornography for the rest of their life immediately decrease. Because then they can take this one intense experience and use it as a springboard rather than using it as an invitation to dive deeper and using it as something that shames them and breaks them. Yeah, I'll offer you this just based on my experience. And again, I want to say, for those of you who've already confronted your children with this, it's not too late to sit next to them and find out what's going on under the hood. It's not too late. For my parents, I love you if you're watching this. They did the best that they knew how. It's not their fault that they'd never encountered this before. This was new. This was something that neither of them had really dealt with in their life. And they did the best that they knew how, and that has put me in a place today to be able to give you this knowledge and this information. In essence, because my parents handled things the way that they did, you now get this bit of knowledge that you never would have had. And I'm grateful to them because now I can share that. So I want you to consider this today, because there's pornography everywhere. You're never going to get around it. You're never going to let your kids never see it. There's no way that you can cover their eyes. Inside of parental controls, inside of internet filters, inside of whatever, there's always something somewhere that will show up. Shoot, I found it at Barnes & Noble the other day, just wandering through the store. It's all over the place. It's not a question of whether they'll see it. It's a question of how they engage with it, why they engage with it, and how you respond when you start to see this happening. And if you can respond with love, understanding that it's simply a sign of suffering. And, yeah, their body's designed to be really excited about these types of things, so there's that too. But if you can respond in the correct way, then it no longer becomes something that controls their life and defines who they are. Instead, it's something that functions as a springboard to push them on the path of wisdom, so that they cease to be controlled by it earlier on.